On the night of May 4 to 5, 1943, more than 40 U-boats closed in on Convoy Owens 5 in the cold, heaving waters of the North Atlantic. The Convoy, 43 merchant vessels making the long haul from Liverpool to Halifax, moved slowly westward, heavily guarded but still dangerously exposed. The escort crews already knew the odds, 30 submarines hunting just 16 escorts. For the U-boat commanders, this should have been a clean, decisive slaughter. Instead, it marked the turning point of the entire Atlantic campaign. The battle truly began on April 28, when U-650 sighted the convoy nearly 400 nautical miles south of Greenland. From his Paris headquarters, Admiral Karl Donitz reacted instantly, ordering every available submarine toward the target. 2 Wolfpacks, Star and Fink, were assembled, totaling 43 U-boats, one of the largest formations ever launched against a single convoy. For 3 relentless years, German U-boats had ruled the Atlantic. Surfacing under cover of night, running faster than most escorts, unseen by existing British radar, they slipped ahead of convoys and struck from the Black Ocean. Just weeks earlier, in March 1943, the U-boat arm had sunk 82 Allied merchant ships, nearly 476,000 tons, the worst month of the war for Allied shipping. Britain was cracking. Fuel reserves were down to 3 months. Food stores approached emergency conditions. Germany had never seemed stronger. 240 operational U-boats, 118 already deployed, new boats rolling out of shipyards at 20 per month. Losses remained under 10 per month. Mathematically, Germany looked unstoppable. Yet something subtle had shifted, something the U-boat captains couldn't explain. In April, losses rose to 15 submarines. Not a disaster, but unusual enough to raise alarms. Commanders blamed better escort coordination and heavier Allied air presence. Intelligence analysts detected no sign of revolutionary new Allied technology. Nothing suggested a system-changing threat. Veteran ace Werner Henke, commander of U-515, had recently completed one of the most devastating convoy attacks of the war. 7 ships sunk in 12 hours off West Africa. Even during that triumph, he sensed something wrong. A British destroyer appeared out of nowhere, with no warning from his METOX radar receiver, a device that had always detected British 1.5-meter radar long before danger. Henke barely escaped after a crash dive. His equipment tested perfectly upon return. Engineers chalked it up to operator error. But similar reports multiplied. Corvette Captain Eric Topp, despite retiring from combat patrols, heard the same stories from the front. Aircraft finding surfaced U-boats at night with uncanny precision, escorts arriving with 0 METOX warnings, depth charges landing with deadly accuracy even when boats used every evasive maneuver. By early May, headquarters had logged 17 separate incidents of unexplained Allied detection. The conclusion was inescapable. Something had changed. But German intelligence had no evidence of any British advancement. Captured aircraft equipment showed the same old radar. Intercepts revealed nothing new. If the Allies had developed a radically different radar, it would mean German research was years behind. The staff refused to accept that possibility. They blamed faulty receivers instead. They were wrong. On March 17, 1943, British Coastal Command deployed its first operational ASV Mark III radar on a Wellington bomber. Powered by the revolutionary cavity magnetron, ASV Mk3 operated at 10 cm wavelengths, completely invisible to the METOX receivers every U-boat carried. It could detect a surfaced submarine from 16 kilometers, and even a periscope from 8 kilometers. To a U-boat commander, it was as if the aircraft simply materialized from the darkness. The magnetron itself, developed in 1940 by John Randall and Harry Boot, was nothing short of a technological leap. Earlier vacuum tubes couldn't generate enough power at short wavelengths, but the new copper block resonant cavity design produced enormous microwave output. Early prototypes reached 400 watts, and by mid-1940, production units powered 10 kilowatts pulses, strong enough for long-range, high-precision radar. ASV Mark III was finicky, heavy, and maintenance-hungry. 90 kilograms of fragile components, spinning antennas, and cathode ray tubes. Magnetrons burned out after 40 to 60 hours. Antenna drives jammed in humidity. But when the system worked, it transformed night patrols. Aircraft could find a surfaced U-boat long before it could react. At a distance of 1 kilometer, a submarine needed 30 seconds to crash dive, time the aircraft easily outran. Originally intended for ground mapping H-2S radar, the magnetron was diverted in emergency quantities to Coastal Command after Churchill reviewed the catastrophic March losses. On March 25, he overruled Bomber Command objections and ordered immediate transfer of radar sets to anti-submarine units. Without secure Atlantic supply lines, he insisted, Britain could collapse before strategic bombing achieved anything. The Germans had no idea. ASV Mark III radar entered operational service in March 1943, and its impact was immediate. The first confirmed success came on March 22, when a Wellington bomber from No. 172 Squadron located U-665 in the Bay of Biscay. The submarine's METOX receiver, normally its early warning shield, remained completely silent. The aircraft closed to just 300 meters before the crew even realized they'd been found, dropping 6 depth charges in a perfectly executed attack. U-665 survived, but the damage was so severe that it was forced to abort its patrol. Over the next 6 weeks, ASV Mark III equipped aircraft sank 11 U-boats and damaged 23 others, almost all without being detected beforehand. METOX provided no warnings. To the bewildered U-boat commanders, it seemed the British must be spotting submarines visually in total darkness, because no other explanation made sense. German intelligence investigated every single attack in detail. They interviewed crews, inspected damaged boats, and examined equipment piece by piece. Nothing appeared unusual. METOX receivers tested perfectly. British radar, according to all intelligence assessments, should still have been operating on frequencies used for 2 years. There was no hint of new technology. Then, in early May, a rumor began to circulate. Several returning submarine commanders claimed that captured British aircrew had told interrogators that Coastal Command was homing in on emissions from the METOX receivers themselves. Since superheterodyne receivers do release faint intermediate frequency signals, the idea seemed technically plausible. German engineers confirmed that METOX leaked detectable emissions at 455 kHz, though they could only be picked up within a range of roughly 2 kilometers using laboratory-grade equipment. But could the British have developed airborne direction-finding systems sensitive enough to detect these emissions from 90 kilometers away? Engineers ran the math. Such performance would require receiver sensitivity more than 50 dB beyond existing technology, plus large directional antennas far too big for aircraft. The physics simply didn't add up. Still, the alternative explanation was even harder to accept. If British aircraft weren't detecting METOX emissions, they must have developed a new radar operating on wavelengths far shorter than anything METOX could pick up, below 60 centimeters. And German science had long ago concluded such centimetric systems were impractical, too weak, too short-ranged, too unreliable to be of real military use. Surely British research had hit the same wall. The intelligence staff found themselves trapped between 2 unlikely possibilities. Either Britain had created a radar system German scientists believed was impossible, or they had perfected a direction-finding technology German engineers believed was unattainable. But U-boats were dying, and headquarters had to offer guidance. Ultimately, they chose the explanation that fit familiar physics: the METOX emission theory. It could be tested and it could be countered. The alternative, operational centimetric radar, was too disruptive to strategic assumptions to accept without absolute proof. Thus, on August 3, 1943, Admiral Dönitz issued an emergency order. All U-boats at sea were to shut off their METOX receivers immediately. Better, he believed, to operate without radar warning than to risk broadcasting their presence to every British patrol plane within 100 kilometers. But the entire story was a carefully crafted deception. British intelligence had prepared captured aircrew to spread the METOX emission myth to protect the true secret, ASV Mark III's centimetric radar, completely invisible to German detectors. The cover story worked flawlessly. German engineers proved to themselves that METOX did emit signals, and never suspected the truth, that Allied aircraft were using frequencies their equipment could not even perceive. The result was disastrous. By shutting off METOX, U-boats became blind to both the new radar and the older 1.5-meter ASV Mark I still widely used. The August order made them even more vulnerable. By late May 1943, the consequences were undeniable. Convoy ONS-5 had been attacked by more than 40 U-boats. They sank 13 merchant ships, but 6 submarines were lost and 7 so badly damaged they had to withdraw. 15% of the striking force was gone. Historically, Germans lost 1 or 2 boats per major attack while sinking dozens of merchantmen. The ratio had flipped. Convoy SC-128 in mid-May was worse. 17 U-boats attacked. They sank 0 merchant ships. 5 submarines were destroyed. 4 more were crippled. Escort groups achieved flawless defense while inflicting catastrophic losses, something that had never happened in the entire Battle of the Atlantic. Then came Convoy SC-130 at the end of May, the breaking point. Among the attacking boats was U-954, carrying Peter Donitz, the Admiral's own son, serving as watch officer. On May 19, U-954 was discovered by a British escort frigate and destroyed by depth charges. All hands were lost. Peter was just 21 years old. When the news reached Admiral Donitz, he ordered an immediate and sweeping review of operations. The numbers were staggering. In May alone, 41 U-boats lost, a quarter of the entire operational force, 37 more damaged, many unusable for months, only 58 Allied merchant ships sunk, 34 in the Atlantic. The mathematics were brutal. Germany could replace submarines, but not the elite, hard-earned experience of the crews. Many of the commanders lost in May were seasoned veterans with long, successful patrol histories, skills Germany would never regain. Their experience, instincts, and ability to interpret danger in seconds couldn't be replaced by fresh academy graduates. The U-boat arm was bleeding away the one thing it couldn't rebuild, its institutional memory, the seasoned judgment that made its Wolfpacks deadly. On May 24, 1943, Admiral Donitz made the hardest call of his career. A signal went out to every U-boat in the Atlantic: withdraw from convoy lanes. Return to base. Suspend all attacks until further orders. The Battle of the Atlantic was, for Germany, effectively finished. In his diary, Donitz wrote, "We are facing the gravest crisis in submarine warfare. The enemy has made our operations nearly impossible through new location devices and is inflicting severe losses." He didn't know what those devices were, how they functioned, or how to counter them. All he knew was that his submarines could no longer fight. Sending them out meant losing crews and boats for nothing. That withdrawal ended the U-boat offensive that had once brought Britain to the brink of starvation. For 3.5 years, German submarines hunted Atlantic convoys relentlessly. They sank more than 2,300 merchant ships, over 11 million tons of cargo, and killed 30,000 merchant sailors. For a time, they came within weeks of severing Britain's lifelines. Churchill later admitted the U-boat threat was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. And yet, it was broken by a 10-centimeter radar system the Germans didn't even know existed. The truth surfaced slowly. On September 4, 1943, 4 months after the withdrawal, Telefunken delivered the first Naxos radar warning receivers to U-boat bases. Naxos could sense centimetric radar, operating between 2500 and 3750 MHz, covering the British 10 cm band. Finally, submarines could detect ASV Mark III before aircraft homed in on them. But by then, it was far too late. Allied anti-submarine power had grown overwhelming. Long-range B-24 Liberators had sealed the once lethal mid-Atlantic air gap. Escort carriers provided non-stop air cover. Hunter-killer groups with the latest sonar and radar hunted submarines aggressively instead of merely guarding convoys. And Allied shipyards were producing new merchant vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. Naxos revealed the mystery that had destroyed the U-boat fleet during the spring. Operators reported picking up 10 cm radar at distances up to 8 km, enough warning to crash dive before aircraft reached attack range. But the device was unreliable. It suffered frequent false alarms, triggering dives that drained batteries and exhausted crews. Many commanders found it nearly as troublesome as having no warning at all. Germany tried adapting. U-boats were fitted with more anti-aircraft guns and ordered to fight on the surface rather than dive. The result was catastrophe. British aircraft could strike from beyond the range of submarine guns. Commanders tried shifting operations to the South Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and Caribbean, but centimetric radar followed them everywhere. ASV Mark III and its American equivalents had become standard equipment worldwide. By late 1943, the ocean had no shadows left to hide in. American patrol aircraft from Brazil and the Caribbean used the A/APS-2 radar, nearly identical to ASV Mark III. The Allies now held a global technological advantage. The core U-boat tactic, operating surfaced at night, invisible to older Allied radar, was dead. Centimetric radar could see them as clearly as daylight. Forced to remain submerged, U-boats lost their speed and range. Underwater travel cut them from 17 knots to barely 7, and battery endurance became their greatest limitation. A Type Vikes batteries, at full submerged speed, lasted only 90 minutes. Even at slow speed, the 80-hour endurance meant 80 hours with almost no mobility. Worse, batteries had to be recharged on the surface for 4 to 6 hours, making the submarine a perfect radar target. The cycle became destructive: hide underwater to avoid radar, drain batteries, surface to recharge, get detected, dive again, and drain batteries further. Patrol effectiveness collapsed. By late 1943, U-boat missions had become near suicidal. New boats entered the Atlantic with barely trained crews, many of whom had never faced Allied air superiority. Loss rates soared above 50%. Some submarines were destroyed before they even reached their assigned patrol zones. The average U-boat lifespan in the Atlantic had shrunk to less than 3 months. In 1942, it had been more than a year. Training couldn't solve the crisis. The U-boat school at Gotenhafen produced crews every month, but they received only 12 weeks of preparation. Nowhere near enough to master navigation, torpedo tactics, diesel maintenance, damage control, and the countless skills that veterans had learned through years of combat. These new sailors lacked the instincts that kept earlier crews alive. Surviving commanders tried to advise them, but experience could not be taught in 3 months. The old methods no longer worked. The doctrine that once dominated the Atlantic was obsolete overnight. Captain Lieutenant Werner Henke survived until April 9, 1944, when U-515 was sunk by American destroyers and aircraft from USS Guadalcanal. 16 crewmen were killed, 44 survived, including Henke. He was later killed during an escape attempt at Fort Hunt, Virginia. ASV Mark III remained classified until after the war. German intelligence never fully understood what struck them in Black May. They detected British centimetric radar only in fragments and never realized how early it had been fielded or how thoroughly it reshaped the war at sea. British Coastal Command's post-war reports revealed the scale. Between March and July 1943, aircraft equipped with ASV Mark III sank 37 U-boats and heavily damaged 49 more, over half of all German losses in that period. Most attacks came with no warning. Surviving crews wrote that their radar detectors remained silent until aircraft were almost overhead. Germany eventually built its own centimetric radar, the Berlin series, based on a captured British magnetron from a downed bomber in February 1943. It reached operational U-boats in late 1944. But by then, the Battle of the Atlantic was already over. The U-boats using Berlin radar were mostly relegated to weather and transport missions. Dönitz himself believed multiple factors had broken his U-boat fleet: improved Allied training, better convoy tactics, stronger escorts, advanced sonar and depth charges, and the closing of the air gap. He recognized centimetric radar contributed, but he never realized it had been the decisive blow, an innovation that invalidated his entire doctrine in a single month. The numbers prove it. In March 1943, U-boats sank 82 merchant ships while losing 12 submarines, a nearly 7-to-1 advantage. In April, 39 ships sunk, 15 U-boats lost, about 2.5-to-1. In May, 34 ships sunk, 41 submarines lost. The ratio reversed. Germany was now losing more submarines than ships destroyed. After May, the advantage never returned. By the end of 1943, it took more than 3 U-boat patrols to sink a single merchant ship. By 1944, it was closer to 5. The U-boat fleet continued fighting until 1945, but never again threatened Allied control of the Atlantic. The offensive that nearly starved Britain into surrender was broken not by a grand battle, but by a radar system operating on a wavelength German receivers couldn't detect. Wars often turn not on heroics, but on quiet technological leaps that one side doesn't even realize the other has made. ASV Mark III wasn't a miracle weapon. It was a modest upgrade built around a new vacuum tube capable of generating shorter wavelengths. But introduced at the perfect moment, against an enemy blind to its existence, it changed the course of the war. Join our mission to uncover forgotten battles, like, subscribe, and share to keep history alive. And ONS 5 would reveal just how blind they truly were.